Hello everybody, I'm Orc and I make minis in HeroForge. This week's mini that we are looking at is Clinkz, the Bone Fletcher. Bone Fletcher? I think it's called Bone Fletcher. Anyway, he's from Dota 2. We're gonna be looking at a very spooky, scary skeleton today, and it's gonna be pretty exciting. First things first, though, why did I make Clinkz? Well, first of all, there was like a challenge to it, so I thought it would be kind of a fun thing to try to make like a skeleton. The other reason is in my childhood, I used to play a lot of Dota on Warcraft 3, on my cousin's computer, and I loved it. I loved playing against bots, and it was like the best thing ever. Except whenever I was like playing the game, there was just like this one hero that would pop out of stealth and just like kill me immediately, and it was really annoying. And that hero was Clinkz. Then like later on, I used to play Dota 2 for like maybe 6 months or something like that, and I was like essentially one-tricking Clinkz, but that was just like that was a long time ago, and luckily I didn't continue. I dodged the bullet essentially by not continuing to play Dota. So, but anyway, Clinkz is here, and he also has like a pretty awesome backstory. I already told you guys that I really love the trope of like good guys going bad or like becoming corrupted and stuff. This is one of my favorite tropes. And this character's lore is essentially that he was like a hero. He slayed like a demon lord or something like that. He got as a reward like infinite life or something like that. And but he got like whoosh, he got nuked. The man got nuked when the devil died. Kind of like the in Castlevania when that one lady nukes herself. Anyway, yeah, skeletons. Awesome. He's really short, That's what I kind of like about like Clinkz. He's like a sort of a sneaky bastard. And when we take a look at the height of this character model, it's really short. It's a really short model, And I think that's what like makes Clinkz fun. He's like a skulkery, skeletony guy. I would also like to talk a little bit about skulls. Skulls are a little bit weird in HeroForge. This thing that we are looking at head-wise is not like a skull model that HeroForge has. No, it's not. This is a skull that I had to make from scratch, because there is a skull model, and I can show you shortly what it looks like. It's here. Is the humanoid skull. And do you see the issue? The issue is that the skull is not editable. This is the only thing that you can edit about the skull, which is freaking weird, Like, why aren't we able to edit like facial features of a skull? And I'm saying that because when you take the most famous skeletons in like media and stuff, there's usually something about their skull that is like weird, that makes them a little bit stand out, and papyrus kind of like comes to my mind. It would be really great if we could have like an editable skull, because like Clinkz is like this. He's an angry skeleton, okay? He's got like issues because he can't die. So instead, what I had to do, I took this monkey features and yeah, I transformed these monkey features slowly into this looking skeleton. You can see here I'm using the monkey features. And I started with monkey features because like Clinkz's skull, it kind of looks monkey-like. He's got like this very low like forehead, unlike me. I'm the 5 head. So let's go take a look at some older models. In the very first model here, you can see uh, the face that I decided to go for. It's the monkey, like I was saying, and I was just kind of like looking for the gloves, And I definitely also wanted like these sort of shoes that have like this sort of an ending. I also wanted to have like these shoes which have like thingies around like sides here and here, but like I didn't find any. I was like, okay, it's fine. Let's just use these. It's okay. This is when I started to continue working on the skull a little bit more. The way I do this is just by combining like different face features. So because I combine this feature with like decomposing features, it's like much easier for me to create like a certain face from scratch and stuff. This is only the part where I applied like different features to different parts to like help shape the skull a little bit, but I still haven't applied like any big edits or any small edits. Like this is how I kind of work. I first like apply these like regular features, and then I do like the big edits for each section. And after I'm done with the big edits, I then do like small edits, and then I just like give things like one final look. And if there's anything that I don't like, I change it up or try to change it up. So yeah. Here I was doing the pose already, I wanted him to be a skulky guy. So this is how the skull looks like after I applied all the big and small edits. And I believe this part is after I applied, yeah, like once you're actually done with like the face, that's where you can go like to the emotions and stuff and like adjust that. This is where I did the posing for the character, so I already had like in mind that maybe Clinkz is just kind of like looking at somebody, and as he's like going to like draw an arrow, and he's got like his bow here. One thing I didn't like is how the like teeth behaved on Clinkz here. So if I try to like add teeth here, for example, these vampire teeth, I didn't like the way they looked. They looked like a little bit weird, or they didn't look scully enough. I instead decided to kid bash these teeth in. You can see that this is like where I added them, and I figured like this looked way better than what we had before, because like I was saying, Clinkz does have like a monkey feel to him a little bit, especially like with those like sharp fangs and stuff. And I also use like the new tongue that they introduced, which is like flamey and stuff. So here is where I added the horns. I thought the horns looked really good. And this is also where I was starting to feel like, yeah, this looks pretty damn fucking awesome. So yeah, um, I think like these horns kind of even they look better quality than what the Dota 2 model of Clinkz has, which is kind of sad. And this is where I gave him the bow. I believe the bow is Kid Bash, but I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah, the bow is Kid Bashed because it was like way too big for little Clinkz. I mean, let me see the bow here. Nope, wrong hand. It's gigantic. Like, what the frick? And Clinkz is more of like a short bow type of bow rather than like a huge freaking ballista bow. So I had to like Kid Bash it in instead because you can't really like make weapons smaller in HeroForge, unfortunately. I was also thinking whether I should give him like skeletal arrows or like fire arrows, but he is the Bone Fletcher, So I think in the end, I think canonically, Clinkz probably is using like bone arrows and he just sets them on fire or something like that. I don't know, to be honest, but I thought it was like a bit more appropriate rather than having him, because he has like these flames in this area. He doesn't have the flames in his quiver, so why would the arrows be on fire? This is where I started to. This is where I kind of locked in all the clothing pieces. So I had like this wonderful cloak, which I thought looked cool. I don't think Clinkz has this necessarily. I particularly liked also these gloves. These gloves are not like 100% accurate as to what Clinkz has, but I thought they looked really good and very classy for a skeleton. And then we also had like this thing, which was like it's a skirt, so you know I already know that it's a kid bashing nightmare. And one thing that I didn't like about the skirt, it is this part here specifically. And this is also something which ended up in the model in like the final version. I don't like these little thingies poking out, but I just didn't know how else to do it so that it like doesn't poke out. So it's like it's fine, you know. Just like if this thing just doesn't want to cooperate, it's okay, and we just move on. And this is where I gave him like the two horns that he also has on his this area. Chin. Yeah. Now here is where I applied all the colors. Um, and by all the colors, I mean I applied the body, you know, and the theme, you know, and then whenever I like do this sort of stuff, I just like pick one thing which is like closest to the color scheme, and then I edit the colors later. I of course like made this thingy a little bit of a different color because when you take a look at Clinkz, his skeleton is white, of course. He has a white skeleton. Well, partially. He's white, but he's also like brown and black. But it's because he's got like flames coming from his chest, and that like heats up the bones around him, so like the area around his chest becomes like brown, and his like head also is like brown slash black. So um we'll get back to those colors later, and you'll see how it actually looks better. I was also thinking about like what sort of an environment to put Clinkz on. I figured it would be appropriate. Like I didn't feel like nature was Clinkz's calling, honestly. I felt like his calling was more of a something that represents the dire. Here I was like playing around with the different face decals, and this was like very important part of Clinkz, and it was like really difficult to get right. He's got like this yellowish orangish face, you know, and then like the rest of his skull goes like black or like brown. It's easier for you to put on a mask on the black rather than. What I'm trying to say is that there are not a lot of decals which are affecting like back of the mind, or not a lot of decals which are affecting back of the mind in a cool way, and you have like much more options like in this area. Anyway, here I was just trying to like find something that represented Clinkz the best, and this was not it. A little bit more color work. I was also trying like a darker skeleton, but like I said, that's not really his color. He's like he's a white skeleton. Partially white skeleton. He's a partially white skeleton. Okay. Yep, I changed him back. Here is where I kind of replaced the environment with the dire stuff. And here is also where I decided to reset my current progress on Clinkz because it just wasn't looking the way I liked it. And I also added like this sort of a thingy, which I figured looked pretty good. And then I had to also add like a shoulder pad as an extra here to hide like this sort of an imperfection. Yep, the skeleton is forming. Here's the shoulder pad. And I also added like these sort of like fallen leaves. I really was like thinking a lot about like the dire's environment, and it very commonly has like these sort of dead trees, like which look kind of like blackish and stuff. Of course, I'm not gonna like put there a goddamn tree, but I also noticed that as a contrast to the black ground, there is also like a lot of like fallen leaves in the Dota 2 game, which are like reddish, orangish, and stuff. Well, you know, Dyer's color scheme essentially. So I figured that would be like a cool thing to add. I also feel like this gold, I played a little bit more with the purple color and the gold. I think this looks like particularly great as a contrast to each other. I really love how the purple and the gold like work together. Here I added a bowstring. If you watch my tongue tutorial, then you know how to make it. But essentially what we have here, this here, this here is a stretched out tongue. You know, I believe this is like a serpent's tongue. Yes, this is like a serpent's tongue. And then we have like this thingy, which is something that you can like put around the neck and stuff. It's like a scarf. And then we have like at the end also here another scarf. To be honest, I'm not sure how like wooden bows, how the wooden bows are, they have like string attached. I believe wooden bows have like some sort of a compartment where you actually like put the string. And I was thinking about like skeleton bows. I was thinking about skeleton bows, and I was thinking like, well, where do you put the string? Is there like a compartment? And I figure maybe it's like attached in this sort of a fashion. Hopefully he tied it well enough. This is where I started adding the flames. No, this is just the lightning. Very cinematic. If you want to like add lights to your HeroForge models, which are gonna be also reflected in the either like the 2D form or like 3D form, if you like decide to print it out, you need to have like the pro version, and you can like do it with lights here. Here is, I believe, where I was more or less set on the color scheme. I added like a small detail here because I felt like this thing was a little bit awkward here. But this is already like starting to look pretty good. Yeah. This is where I started playing with the flames a little bit. And you can see that I was still keeping the face decals as the last part because I felt like that thing is gonna be like the absolute hardest to do. But yeah, I just added some flames. It's just a bunch of like kid bashed flames, and you know. And what I really wanted to achieve with these flames is I kind of wanted them to go kind of in and out between the ribs, you know, for like a pretty cool effect. And that kind of like brings us more or less to the kind of almost final version here. But this still had like some sort of issues. For example, one of the issues that I had is that I had like this sort of a decal, and it was also covering too much of a chin. Like it wasn't supposed to cover this much sort of a stuff. But then I had like a pretty good solution to it as well. And a lot of these like face decals that I'm using here are vitiligo. They're like splotches. So, and this brings us to the final version of Clinkz. Here is the issue that I had with the skeleton here. So I actually used a beard, you know, but like not all of it. And it did kind of like, if you do look at it, yeah, it kind of does look like a beard. But I think if you like don't think about it, it looks more like some suit, you know, maybe coming from the flames and stuff. And there was like also like a pretty happy accident. So one of the vitiligo marks or something like that had like also like these back thingies, and they look pretty cool, I think, you know. So I'm really happy how this model turned out. So we have Clinkz. He is on the team of Dyer. He's got his like shoes, which are like whoop perked up. He's got a skeleton bow with a string made out of tongue. He's got really classy gloves. I really love these gloves. He doesn't have these gloves in game, but I thought they looked like really fucking cool. And I gave him some sort of cool armor here. You know, he's got a cool cloak, and he's about to draw an arrow, and he's an angry skeleton. You know, he's angry because you stole his farm. but I don't think you're gonna be able to deny him because of the base damage of his arrows. I also, as you can see here, I managed to I managed to fix another problem. So one of the issues I also had here is if I try to paint this part, or like this part of the skeleton, well, I don't know. Anyway, I had like an issue where if I try to paint the rib cage, if I try to paint the rib cage, it would like paint the entire rib cage and it like wouldn't look great. Something like that. I don't exactly remember. So in this case, the way I decided to solve it is by a gradient. So we have a whole body projected gradient right here. And this is which only affects like this part, like the skeleton parts, obviously. The spooky, scary skeleton parts. But it's essentially like the circle. It's a circle gradient, you know, which is able to create this sort of an effect. So we have like a pretty good color transition between like the charred bones and the white skeleton. So there you go. For the portrait, I decided to use like this cavern backdrop. Like originally, I wasn't going to use it, but like then I thought like, what other character is gonna use like a lava background? And I felt like, well, this guy did go to hell, you know, and he returned from it, so I guess it's appropriate to give it to him. All right, that's about it. Thank you guys for deciding to spend your time with me. And yeah, that's about it. All right, take care and bye bye.